We're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have a very special guest today I'm super excited about. So if you enjoy this and you like what we're talking about, please hit that like down below so it tells YouTube that you like what we're doing here and you want to see more of it. Hi, Sandra. Welcome. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Trisha. I'm your pattern nerd friend, and I'm the owner of Creative Costume Academy. And this here, we have a special guest today, Katrina Walker. And Katrina, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Well, hello. Thank you, Trisha. And yes, I'm Katrina Walker, and I am a professional in the home sewing industry, which it always amuses me to say that because I get the weirdest looks for people. Like, what is that?
That's a great way of putting it. I never thought of it that way.
Well, because, how do you put it, right? It's like I teach people how to sew, but there's so much more to it than that, right?
Absolutely.
So sometimes I try to explain, it's like, well, so anyhow, what that means is, so I have a background in clothing and textiles. I've been sewing since I was a little girl. So I can't remember a time when fabric and sewing and all that was not part of my life. So grew up with it and then pursued it more. I mean, my actual degree is in history. So I didn't formally pursue it. My bachelor's. Yes.
I don't think I remembered that.
Yeah, well, I went to Wellesley. They don't have practical, things like fashion design at Wellesley. So, I mean, I did pursue my master's in clothing and textiles. So there is that. So I do have a background in textile science, and I've also taken a lot of classes from private instructors too. So I'm a Palmer Pledge certified fit instructor. So I worked with Patty Palmer over the years, and she's been a big mentor of mine. And also taking, a lot of my pattern making, illustration, all those classes. Actually, I picked up more a la carte from private schools. So all to the good. But my primary role really is helping people to be able to create what they want to create, just like you, Trisha. I mean, in that sense, right? I mean, that's what we want to do, is empower people to make what they want. I mean, I think the biggest compliment is always a student who basically outshines you. It's like, absolutely. I'm not the world's greatest.
Runs with it. That's
right? Totally. So, I mean, I would never say, oh, I'm the best sewist in the world. That's not it. But hopefully I do an excellent job of explaining things, which is more important because that's my job. So, I'll be watching, by the way. If I keep looking up this way, it's because that's where my screen is for if there's any questions and things. But anyhow, so just I'm a total textile junkie. So that's why I'm with Trisha on this, because for me, a large part of my personal enjoyment, I'm a silk and wool specialist. In fact, most of my classes beginning when I started in the industry, close to 20 years ago, it was mostly focusing on silk and wool. And so total textile junkie. I even actually raise wool. I have a flock of natural colored sheep. And I've gone to Japan to study silk production. So I'm just
with the worms, right?
Junkie. Yeah, totally. A textile junkie. And so I'm super excited to work with Trisha on this upcoming class.
Yay. And what Katrina is talking about is right now, I actually have the doors open to my private pattern making community called the Pattern Place. We only open the doors a couple times a year. And right now is that time. So we only have the doors open until this Friday at 11:59. So Friday, the September 27th. So, and Katrina, so in our membership, and we could talk more about that. Please, if you're here, ask us questions, ask about Katrina's expertise, because she is our textile guru that I'm bringing in to the Pattern Place. Because what we do in the Pattern Place is we have a couple live events. There's a whole resource library. There's so much to talk about. It's a fully supportive community and resource library and everything else to help you in your pattern making, creating journey. But twice a month we go live with a live event. One is a live Q&A session with myself, so you can ask me anything about whatever you're working on, and I'm happy to guide you along and answer your questions. And then the second live event is a bonus masterclass that we then add to the library after we've done it live. Then it just goes into our library that you can watch afterwards, if that's something you want to watch. So the community has been asking for a while, actually, to teach a class about textiles, to ask about what kind of fabric should I pick when I'm wearing, when I'm wanting to make certain garments. And I love this topic, and I see how important that is for creating new things. For those of you who don't know, my background is in costume making for big theatrical productions. So my clients, and I still have my other business that I've had for about 15 years, where we service large scale productions. Like Disney is one of our clients, Cirque du Soleil style shows, Broadway shows like Jersey Boys, Cinderella we're doing right now, that kind of thing. So in my world, I don't get a choice most of the time. They go, here, make this out of this. And my job is to figure it out and figure out the pattern. So my strength and my, expertise is in the fit and the pattern and making whatever the designer desires, and making it fit the performer so that they can do their thing. So I don't know a lot about fabric and textiles because I haven't really had that luxury. I did learn in school, but since people kept asking, I was like, well, I got to find someone because I shouldn't be the one teaching this class because I don't really know. I have made things out of things that they should not have been made out of because that's what we needed to do. But when I met Katrina and I actually met in person, actually earlier this year. Actually, that's not true. Our first time meeting, I took a class from you in New York. Right. Well, I always kind of forget where I met Jen and everybody too, Jennifer Stern as well. And I took a class from her at the American Sewing Guild conference in New York last year. And then we met again where we were all teaching. Katrina and I were both teaching different classes at Puyallup in Washington at the Sew Expo. So when I got to meet Katrina again, I was like, hey, you're like really into textiles. So would you mind joining, coming to be a guest instructor for the Pattern Place? And she agreed. I got her. So we were really excited. She's actually teaching this live class on this Thursday. So 2 days from now. So if you sign up to the Pattern Place today, then you can still join our class with Katrina happening on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. So we're very excited to have Katrina join us. And I know that she's just going to be a wealth of knowledge. And she did talk about her sheep, her raising wool, which I always love that story. I didn't know you got to play with the silkworms. That's really cool. Oh, yeah. But we also should mention that Katrina has been featured several times in Threads magazine, teaching, and you've taught at like almost every sewing convention on
I think so.
She's kind of famous, you guys.
Well, I am. Okay, so one like mind-blowing thing did happen. I don't know if you heard, Trisha, but the American Sewing Guild actually inducted me into the Hall of Fame this summer.
Did they really?
Yes.
Oh my God. That's so
I can say I'm famous.
And well deserved, as they should. So yeah, this is not a little thing. Like Katrina is no small potatoes, you guys. It was a big get for me to have her come and join our community. I know the Sew Stars are super excited. And in fact, one of my Sew Stars, one of my members, and just so you know, I keep referring to this wall of sticky notes here because these are all of our new people who have joined since we opened the doors last Friday. So we're very excited, celebrating everyone here on this wall. Yeah, but I actually, one of my Sew Stars that I met in your class, we were sitting next to each other, and then she ended up signing up the last time when we opened in the spring. And I told everybody that you were coming, and she was like, I love Katrina. I took a class from her. I was like, that's right. You were in my class. That's where we met. So yeah, bringing people together. Let's just make this community, more close knit. But there is a question. Sandra asked a question, and Carolyn's here as well. Actually, both of them are students of mine. If you guys have a question or you want to say anything, we're here. That's the great thing about being live. Let us know what you want to know, what we should chat about. Sandra says, I've been making my own clothes out of quilting cotton because I only want to use natural fibers. What would be the next type of fabric I should try? So Sandra's not new to sewing. I think you've been doing quilting and stuff for a while, but she just started garment making recently. So this is a kind of a new world for her.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, actually, if I seem like I'm laughing, it's because I actually have a lecture that I teach in the quilting world called Cotton Chic, because one of the main things I'm going to be focusing on Thursday is just understanding why you do pair a particular fabric with a particular type of pattern. And I will certainly touch on quilting cotton. The problem with me using quilting cotton, I shouldn't put it, that sounds negative, but the challenge of using quilting cotton for clothing is that it's very structurally limited, and it's not an ideal fabric for making clothing because it's not a forgiving fabric. And so just in a nutshell, I'll just say that for quilting cotton, the design should either be very kind of boxy, kind of geometric, or it should be fitted, or at least semi-fitted, because it doesn't drape. It doesn't drape at all. And so when you don't have any drape, you have to choose designs accordingly. It's not to say you can't make cute clothes with it, but you have to understand what its limitations are. And that's true of any fabric. Like Trisha said, I represent Husqvarna Viking and Pfaff sewing machines, and sometimes Singer. And so like Trisha, sometimes I will be commissioned. They'll send me a picture and be like, okay, we want this. And they'll send me some bolts of fabric and here you go, And so,
it happens in your world too.
Right? Yes, it does. So, I totally get it. And nothing makes me stress out more than like when they send me those model measurements, because half the time, people lie. Models lie.
Oh yeah, you know what I'm dealing with right now? We actually have a big show that we're working on. I will never see these performers. They're in China, actually.
Well, that's just
and they sent me. I was like, we need measurements to make your costumes. We're making prototypes of things. They sent me measurements that the performers took, and they've been. It's always like okay, we're gonna take this with a grain of salt, and what are we gonna guess they mean? Right? That's a fun game.
Oh yeah, I mean, and so I have umpteen dress forms in various sizes, because and I remember this one. I literally was like, "Are you sure these are really her measurements?" And I carefully used an adjustable dress form to exactly duplicate the measurements. I looked at her pictures, because sometimes in photos you can see, are they square shouldered, are they sloping shouldered, and you can make some adjustments, just like, okay, she's my height, but she's like this big, and you can make some adjustments.
That pictures are helpful.
Oh my gosh, but this girl was built like an 8-year-old. I mean, it's like, as I followed it exactly, and it was, if she was really those measurements, it would have fit her perfectly. But I guess I still had to use, where the camera couldn't see it, like alligator clips in the marketing photos. But it's just like, I just have so much sympathy for you, Trisha, because it's like, I just stress out so much, because it's like, look, it fit the information you gave me.
Right.
With the fabric
and at the bottom, at the end of the day, usually on my invoice, on my contract, I'm like, we will make costumes to the measurements provided. Yeah. And then we usually make it alterable. And typically, at least in my world, especially at this point in my game, I used to be on the receiving end of certain things that were made. I've been in all aspects of working costumes on a show. So I understand what happens when I send things. So, luckily at this point in my business, we're sending them to a wardrobe department that will do fitting and make adjustments as necessary. Nice. So that helps a lot. We do the best that we can, but they're going to be the ones who finish it up and put it on the body. Okay,
I was just looking at more questions here, because one thing Sandra's asking is about sourcing garment fabric and being difficult in person, and especially, I mean, people like us who have that professional background, we take a lot of things for granted, in that, I've studied textile science. I was the raw materials liaison for Nordstrom product group. So, every fabric, thread, button, zipper, all that stuff that went into a garment, I didn't get to pick it out, but I had to catalog it correctly. So,
Yeah.
so all that
You got to
terminology.
know where things come from.
Right. And so that's an excellent question too, Sandra. And that might even be we could always work on a source list. Honestly, one of the best things you can do is just study. Study. But that might be something that maybe Trisha, you and I could work on, is just kind of a suggested resource list. One of the good things about—
We do have one resource list, but I think
Okay.
she's particularly asking, like, is there certain keywords that she could search for, like, besides, like, because what my problem is, and I should probably look at updating my resource list, is it's always changing, and especially lately, we've had so many factories close down, and stores close down. So we're losing resources that we used to have. And so it is getting harder and harder to find. But is there certain words that, that are easier to search for and find, like, good garment making materials, maybe?
Yeah, because a lot of it is just a lot of it is studying vocabulary. I mean, and that's not exciting for anyone. But like, let's just take silk, for example. When you think of silk, people will have an idea in their head what it means. And I remember when if you teach a dye class, so I teach dyeing classes, like someone asked me, oh, can I dye such and such? I'm like, well, what fiber is it? Well, it's satin. Well, satin is a weave structure. It is not, it's not a fabric. It's not a fiber. So like, if you take silk, it can run the gamut from a silk chiffon, which is very drapey and limp, versus silk organza, very sheer also, but completely stiff. So just because it's a sheer silk,
or like a dupioni that has a
right,
very different texture.
a dupioni, which actually styles that work for silk dupioni work really well for quilting cotton, because actually the drape characteristics are kind of similar. So there's a little tip for you. But you need to, but it takes a little bit of research, and even then you can make mistakes. So one thing I would say is, don't be discouraged if once in a while you get it wrong, because even we get it wrong sometimes, in that something's not described correctly. Or
I was gonna say, or they lie to you. Like, we just purchased 4-way stretch fabric that was not 4-way stretch. So we are sending it back.
It happens a lot. And there's ways, obviously, when you look at it in person, you can test for drape, and I'll demonstrate that on Thursday. But you have to just kind of, know that dupioni is stiff, know that organza is stiff, know that that chiffon, crepe de chine, and georgette are limp, and that's just talking silk. But even you can get surprised. So like, okay, generally, so where textile science can get kind of complicated is that—
I love this. This is so your world. Like, I just like want to soak it all up.
You may be the pattern nerd. I'm like the fabric nerd.
I love it. We're all nerd about something.
Well, because it's like the differences from one fabric to another, it goes clear down to like basically the molecular level. So we won't go too much into that. But but even the way it's woven, like a plain weave versus a twill weave. So plain is like over, under, and twill weave, like if it's a 2/1, like in denim, it's like over, under, and then it offsets, and that's what makes the diagonal ribs.
Right.
So there's more movement in a twill weave than there is in a plain weave. So usually you get more drape, and it's easier to ease a fabric. Like if you're putting sleeves in, it's easier to put a sleeve in a twill fabric usually than a plain woven fabric. Because a lot of it has to do with what they call interstices, the air spaces between the yarns. So anyway, so you get into all that weird stuff. But I once made a replica 1940s jacket out of a cavalry twill, and I was like, well, it's wool, it's twill, it should ease really well. No, it's horrible. It was a horrible experience. Horrible. I probably have spent like 60 hours at my ironing board with my professional, I mean, I have those like steam generators, right? They're like 50 psi, right? OMG, like the worst part, because it's cavalry twill. And I didn't think about the fact that yes, it's 100% wool, and yes, it's a twill, But think about, why would they call it cavalry twill? Because it's supposed to be on some guy's butt sitting in a saddle for 50 miles a day. So it's
Right.
tough. It's
Super
really
like
tough.
tightly. Yeah.
It's really tightly woven. And the more tightly woven a fabric is, the more difficulty you're going to have with it. That's also
Yeah.
another, just universal, doesn't matter what fiber it is. So there's certain universal truths to fabrics. One is the weave structure tightness. I mean, like microfibers, I'm sure you've been forced to work with microfibers, and they're just a pain in the behind, aren't they? Like, they're just awful because there's no room. There's no room in the structure to make it do anything.
And you know, in my world, a lot of times, but I do want to say this. Yes, Sandra, we will work on a glossary in the pattern place. That's probably, there is one in pattern making, one for pattern terms, but yeah, maybe we should do one for textiles and for fabric. It's a good idea. And welcome, Let's Get Sewing. And I see some people are here, more than the 3 people who had said hello. So please feel free to say hello. We want to hear from you. Ask us questions. We're here just chatting.
Hi, Liz. I know. Let's Get Sewing. That's Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Liz.
You probably met her at Puyallup, actually. So.
Oh, fun. Yeah, Spokane. She says Spokane School. That's
I'm sure you met Liz in Puyallup. So,
well,
Cindy was asking about natural textiles for garments. Well, basically all of them are good for garments because that's what they were used for thousands of years. Because synthetics are pretty new on the block. So
that's what I was actually gonna talk about synthetics.
They all
are. Where my world is mostly synthetics, or has been. I can't say mostly, excuse me.
They're cheaper
because it's sturdy as well, and it's color fast because it's plastic, plastic or oil. So that is a lot of what I've used. And it's also, I worked on a water show for 5 years where acrobats, and polyester did the best. It's, you're not going to lose color, and it's not going to lose its shape, and it can get wet and come out and look fine. And natural fibers, way not a good thing to use because they're meant to go back into the earth. They're natural. So that's, and they don't always, and usually don't ease very well at all if you're trying to do synthetic wovens. So I've learned that over the years too. And you can usually tell.
Uh-oh, is that me? So I don't know if that's Trisha or me. That's just frozen up. Let's see. Oh, so Trisha's frozen. Okay, well, while we wait for Trisha to jump back in, because it's so hard to tell for me, right? Like we're both on the screen. So, while we're waiting for Trisha to come back, yeah, it's totally true that with synthetics and natural fibers, it really varies a lot. It varies a lot depending on, you have to think about your end use. And this is another thing we'll discuss on Thursday is you are you have your lifestyle, you have your performance needs. So it's easy to say, well, all natural fibers work great for garments. So forgive me for throwing out such a generic answer. But the reality is that, okay, for example, you need to think about, okay, I know this sounds really gross, but are you going to sweat in it or not? All right, so I love to make jackets. This is my ditto dress form, so it is me. Whoops. Unfortunately or fortunately. But one thing, I have to redo this jacket. I have to put new sleeves on it because look what happened to the underarm of both sleeves. Do you see how that silk is just shredded? Well, number one, this was for a competition and I was running out of time. So I didn't really have time to do a lot of fitting. It was just a pattern I'd fitted at another time. And so I went ahead and just jumped right in there and did it, right? So the sleeves were a little snugger than I remembered.
Oh, and good.
So, yeah, there she's back. Oh, yeah, no. Well, I just, as soon as I figured out that I couldn't tell if it was you or me because it happened.
I couldn't either. And then it wouldn't let me jump back. It wouldn't let me do anything. So I'm
Yeah.
glad. I'm glad you were still here because I thought maybe we'd have to start over again.
Well, I was just showing the fact that on this silk jacket that I made in a hurry, so I didn't have time to do a lot of fitting on it. So it was a little bit snug, and I've worn this in certain places where I probably sweated in it more than I intended, and so I have to replace the sleeves because see, it's shredded.
Oh, wow.
And it happened on both sides. So the fabric itself literally deteriorated.
Oh,
What can I say? I'm a perimenopausal woman, you know? It's like
hey,
so, and it
you
wasn't
mean
just
you're
one
human
side.
and you live on the planet
You
where
know,
there's
exactly.
weather.
So it's like, and I did it in the same place on both sides. So obviously, I'm gonna take those sleeves off, cut them a little bigger, and you know, it just to try to keep. So there's downsides and upsides too. That's
Yeah.
where with whether it's synthetic or natural, but you got to think about things like performance characteristics. I'm gonna
Yeah.
sweat my clothes, therefore, I better plan accordingly.
But
So,
also, isn't it good? I know that natural fibers like silk and wool are more breathable. Plastic, when
oh,
you're
absolutely.
wearing polyester, it's just like wearing a plastic bag. Like you're
Absolutely. Well, and one of the main sources, they say that one of the main sources for the microplastics, and I'm not talking about the big chunks of garbage floating around the ocean. I'm talking about the stuff that gets in our bloodstream. One of the main sources they say is actually
from
from
our clothes.
washing synthetic clothes.
Wow.
Every
Yeah.
time you wash those polyester polar fleeces, you're putting microplastics into your septic system.
Oof,
So just food for thought.
scary. That's
Mhm.
scary.
But I
Um,
mean, they have their upside too. So
yes, of course. That's what, like I said, longevity. Our Rowena, welcome from Belgium, all the way from Belgium. And Liz is saying, and polyester doesn't shrink, so less fuss before cutting. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Um, and I didn't even know we were having a thunderstorm, Sandra. Thank you.
well, you just
It's
moved
been
too, so it's like there's so many factors.
yeah. Well, and it's weird because on my computer it says I have full power, but who knows? Um, Hi, Lilybug. I'm wearing a flannelette dress with dinosaurs on it that I made myself, and it's cozy. Ooh, that sounds cozy and super cute. I'm wearing long sleeves, even though it's not really cold yet. I am just kind of like willing fall to come sooner. Is it colder there in Seattle? It's always a little chilly. Like,
Well,
well,
I'm in
you're not in Seattle,
Spokane,
but I mean
so
in Washington.
yeah, I'm in Spokane. So I mean, actually, we're having a mini heat wave today. So it's actually in the 80s today, or like very low 80s. We're in my studio, but we haven't turned. We're so cheap. I haven't turned the heat on in my studio yet, so my doors are all open to take advantage of it while it lasts before I have to turn my heat on. So I'm actually, if I'm glowing naturally, it's probably because I am wearing a jacket, and my t-shirt's actually. This is actually a lightweight wool jersey. It's not cotton jersey. It's a wool
Right.
jersey. So, but which actually regulates temperature better. So,
When I went to look, we've got a lot of people here now. We've got Vancouver, Helena, she's one of our students as well. Shelly says cleaning is a prime concern for me. If it can't survive the front loader, not going to fuss with it from Oregon. Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing, speaking of cleaning and washing, I have two things, but I'll mention this first. Speaking of cleaning and washing, that's another thing that we have to consider in the costume world is that you know costumes are having to be made differently than normal clothes because this shirt, I mean, it's long sleeve, so I haven't worn it in months. But if you make a costume for a show, it is worn every single day, at least once a day, if not twice. And if it's a layer, we call it a laundry layer, a layer that touches the skin, sweat for sure happens under those stage
mhm,
lights and when they're dancing around doing all of that.
lights
So
are
that is
hot.
laundered every single night. So actually more damage happens when you launder than it does in the wearing of a garment. So it's put under like costumes are put under some major scrutiny, which is why we have to be mindful of, especially like I said, if it's a laundry layer, we have to be extra mindful of that. And then something that has a laundry layer under it can be a little bit more fragile because it's not laundered as much. But that's
Yeah,
definitely something to keep in mind. And then I was going to mention something about, you said it was a wool jersey that you're wearing, right?
a wool jersey knit, so a single
Wool
knit.
jersey knit. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a true fact that most Americans don't wear out their clothes; they wash out their clothes.
Yes.
And it's like you really can well, think about it. Number one, most of these fabrics have been around a lot longer than dry cleaning has been invented.
Mhm.
So like most silks, I mean, silk is processed in hot water. It is literally processed in nearly boiling water. It's scalding hot. That's what
Mhm.
loosens up the gum. So it's not that silk isn't washable. It usually has more to do when fabrics aren't washable, well, unless they're synthetic like acetate. But
Yeah.
for natural fibers, if they're not washable, it's usually because of the dyes aren't color fast, or there's a
Mm.
finish, something, there's something else going on with it. The
Right,
actual
right.
natural fibers are all hand washable because that's all there
They're
was. But like
natural.
most wools, you're going to wear a layer under them. And then you can actually just sponge it or, back in the day, they just sponged them and brushed them. They
Yeah.
really didn't wash them. But it's usually the interfacings, it's the dyes. There's a lot of other things that are making them
Yeah.
not washable. So
Yeah,
it just
that's a
like, but
good
again,
point.
you have to know your lifestyle. Like, it's
Yeah.
not for me to say what works for you because
Right.
you have your lifestyle. Again, if washing is a priority, then you sew accordingly. That's
Right.
totally fine.
Right.
So I mean, I don't throw on a brocade jacket every day. I live on a ranch. I have sheep right outside my door. you
Ah, I
know?
wanna see the sheep. That's so cool.
Oh, they're right
Well,
over there.
I was gonna ask you about that because when after high school, I went and traveled and, went to Europe, did the whole thing. I just because probably really close, I can't even say a close second. I mean, they're probably neck and neck with like sewing and making things is traveling for me. But when I was preparing for that trip, I grew up in Southern California. We have no weather, it's just perfect all the time. So anytime I go anywhere, I'm like, what do I do? So I'm looking at like we wear, things that you wear for winter in Southern California just because we think it looks cool most of the time. Like, ooh, I would wear beanies because I like this jackets because it looks cool with my outfit, not for function like you do in other places in the country. I do with a little bit more here in North Carolina these days. But before I went to Europe, I was looking at I was worried about it being cold and what do I wear? And so I'd always seen, the long johns, the flat, like not the thermal with like the waffle prints and stuff. But I actually ended up getting a silk underlayer because I was told that was more breathable. Like it would keep you warm if it was cold, it would give you cool if it was warmer out, or at least it was more breathable. Why is that? And is that true for all natural fibers, or is that just like silk in general?
It depends a lot on moisture management because one of the things that people
Got
don't
it.
don't realize, or maybe we just don't want to think about it, it's kind of gross, but all human bodies are constantly giving off moisture.
For sure.
And so a lot of
The
our
skin is our
perceived
largest
comfort,
organ, right?
right? And so a lot of our perceived comfort has to do with moisture management.
Mhm.
So fibers like silk can absorb something like 33% of its actual weight in moisture without feeling
Wow.
wet. And
Wow.
so it has that
Interesting.
ability to manage moisture, and so it feels comfortable. Now, so can get if you live where I live, where it's really dry, kind of like Southern California, but only 3 months
Yeah.
out of the year. Um,
Yeah.
um, we do have a lot of static issues, and that's just because there's so little humidity in the air that
Interesting.
you have those static. But people who live in damper climates, it's not an issue.
Huh.
But
Or
but wool,
Because Las Vegas would be bad. I have never experienced
right?
dryness like I have in
No,
Las Vegas. That was
well,
insane.
or even Denver, anytime you're in high
Mm,
desert too, you get that
'cause it's
altitude
yeah.
and the rain shadows. So Denver is really dry too. But so moisture management, and that's a big reason why some synthetics. So they've had to chemically engineer synthetics to behave like natural fibers, and they've done a good
Mm,
job. So this is not your grandma's polyester. If you remember those
right.
god awful double
Ugh,
knits in like the 60s and 70s, and then you'll
yes.
never get the smell out of them because the thing
Yes.
about polyester is that, right? It doesn't matter how many times you wash it, it's going to stink. One
Yeah.
of the reasons is because polyester is an oleophilic fiber. So it actually attracts and binds to like body oil. So if you
Mm,
look at a
yum.
polyester fiber under a microscope, yeah, it looks kind of like a donut, like this grease ring around it.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, so it just doesn't really get clean. You think it's clean, but it's not. But your silks and wools. So you asked if all natural fibers. No, because cottons and linens and ramis, all the plant fibers
Yeah.
tend to be very what they call hydrophilic, which means that they attract moisture, which can help them feel cooler, but they also hold on to it. Like if you've
Got
ever
it.
had like a rayon sweater, like I have these rib knit, they're kind of fitted rayon
Yeah.
sweaters I like to wear under jackets, but I tell you, they take forever to dry, right? Like I'll run them through dryer cycle and then
Yes.
hang them up
Yeah,
because
that's
it's a
true.
hydrophilic fiber. It holds on to moisture. If you've been outside on a hot day and then went grocery shopping and you're in the freezer section freezing, well, your cotton t-shirt may have felt good while it was pulling all that moisture off your skin, but now it's hanging on to it and now you're getting chilled. So
Right.
wool and silk don't do that because they have better
I was gonna
moisture
say merino
management.
wool is good for that too, because
Yeah,
you
that
can
doesn't, because so now wool, now remember, wool is worn in both the hottest and coldest places on earth.
Yeah.
So there's a sheep for every purpose, but, and I swear I will not go off on that tangent, but
I love it.
I can't help myself. But anyhow, so with wool, if it's thick enough and there's enough moisture, so wool, so here's the technical term. Wool is hygroscopic. So it's not
Okay.
hydrophilic or hydrophobic, it's hygroscopic. So it attracts water vapor, but repels water droplets. So you think
Okay.
about like an Irish fisherman's sweater. They
Yeah.
could be working in the rain. It's going to stay wet even when if it's raining. But here's the cool thing.
But it doesn't
There's
like get
there's that much ambient moisture in the air. Wool actually causes a chemical reaction that gives off heat.
Huh.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
whereas like your tropical weight wools that are so thin,
Yeah.
not only do they help, of course, shade your skin from the sun, but they actually improve the skin's natural evaporative sweating process, and so they help keep the body cool that way. So it's really
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. So I want to say hi to a couple people who've jumped on since we've started. And then someone was asking about the wool jersey being itchy, and then Lilybug said merino is non-itchy. Yeah, I wear a lot of merino wool, but we make it here in New Zealand. Oh, you're in New Zealand. That's awesome. Yeah, New Zealand has a lot of sheep. I didn't know that. I went in my
More
travels.
than people. Yeah.
Yeah. I laid over in New Zealand for like 6 hours. So I was like, well, I'm gonna go check it out. And just the bus, like, or whatever I took, like taxi from the airport to whatever I was going to see. It was like the harbor. There was like a big sailing thing going on. I was like, yeah, we'll go check that out. It was nothing but farmland between the airport. And I think I was at like a 2-hour drive. And I was like, I didn't know there was this many, sheep and whatnot. So that's really interesting. It's gorgeous there too. I want to make it back one day and really get to hang out. Let's see, Babage, is that how you say? From New York City. Welcome. Working on a dress for a formal event, contemplating sewing in metallic coated chiffon. Interesting.
Pretty.
Yeah, that sounds fun. And Lakeshore, Michigan, Melodies from Lakeshore, Michigan. We've got Julie from Massachusetts, and we've got New Jersey, Marcia from New Jersey. Polyester leisure suits. Yes, Carolyn, for sure. That's an amazing knowledge drop right there. I love it. Yes, I know. I'm loving this. Allie McCat says, I like wearing cotton, linen, rayon, bamboo, and merino wool and cashmere. For some reason, silk makes me feel sweaty. And maybe
Sometimes it does. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
I did have a question.
It doesn't transport fiber, or it doesn't transport moisture in quite the same way that the other fibers do. Because sorry, but it's with silk being, especially if it's so there's two ways to process silk. So one is the reeled silk, and that's filament silk coming straight off the cocoon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, let's just say, approximately a kilometer long, right? Each little strand, and each strand of silk is usually 6 to 8 cocoons that have been reeled together. Yeah. So, but because it's so long and unbroken, and it's not fuzzy. So when you have fuzz helps to kind of it creates an insulation between your skin and the fabric. But when silk is so smooth, there can be kind of a clammy effect just because there's not that fuzz to create that air layer.
Yeah.
So with silk, now a knitted silk, like you were talking about, you wearing a silk undergarment. Yeah. If it's knitted, you have some of that air insulation in there
because of the weave, right?
Right. And so between the knitting, The knitting, because of the knit structure, knitting has a lot of air in it, just naturally, between the width, and then that hydrophilic ability of the fabric. That's why it makes a nice thin undergarment. But yeah, so silk, especially if you're talking about like a thin, like a habitai silk or something like that next to your skin, it can feel kind of sweaty and clammy pretty easy, just because it doesn't necessarily, even though it's hydrophilic, it doesn't necessarily transport the moisture away from the skin as easily, or you feel it more because you don't have that
Just
little
sitting
tiny
there.
fuzz layer.
Yeah,
So,
that
yeah.
insulation, if you will, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one question about wool and allergies, actually, that I heard a long time ago. I'm curious what your thoughts are. But before we go any further, I just wanted, since we have more people here, I wanted to just reiterate, in case you jumped on after we started, is we are talking with the lovely Katrina Walker, who, if you haven't noticed by now, is the textile guru. She's a textile nerd, as I am a pattern nerd.
For sure.
And we are discussing textile specifically. So ask us anything about, this, but specifically because Katrina is going to be a guest instructor for my private pattern making community called The Pattern Place, which is only open this week until Friday. And actually, Katrina's class is this Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, which would be 3 p.m. for you West Coasters. And she's going to be teaching a whole class about textiles. So if you have been looking for a place to get supported with your fitting, with pattern making, with sewing in general, and you want to be part of an amazing community, we only open the doors twice a year to keep it this intimate, great environment. And so we're very excited to have Katrina join us. And we would love, if you sign up with us, before Thursday, then you'll get to join Katrina's class and get all of the nitty gritty goodness about what textiles work best for certain garments. And then that is just one of many, many, many bonuses. And you can find the link down in the description if you're curious to check it out. But I wanted to let you know about that. But I was curious about, I heard a while back, and I don't know that this is true, that most people who are allergic to wool aren't actually allergic to wool. They're allergic to the lanolin that is like a treatment that goes onto the wool. Is that true? Or is there any validity to that? Do you know?
No, well, there's a difference between being sensitive to wool and allergic to wool.
Right.
So, so lanolin is the sheep's natural skin oil, and actually lanolin is used in a lot of cosmetics and a lot of lotions and things, because lanolin is actually more similar to human sebum. Again, we're going into gross territory here, but so
it's fascinating. I love it.
Your natural skin oil and the skin oil that comes off the sheep and ends up in the wool are very chemically similar. They're the most similar. That doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who are allergic to it, because that can be the case.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually buy pharmaceutical grade lanolin that's been, is extremely pure, to actually add in and make some of my own lotions for like extreme dryness, because it actually helps to repair, like my hands are really dry right now, but it really helps with barrier. If you've ever heard someone talk about lipids and barrier management, lanolin is very good for helping to restore the natural moisture barrier. Because again, remember, we're kicking off moisture all the time.
Yeah.
So if that barrier is not working, right? If the barrier's not working properly, you're shedding too much moisture, basically. So, at any rate, so going back to the wool. So it's funny. I just had a fleece and fiber day here at my farm on Saturday. And so one of the classes we talked about was just like a sheep for every occasion. And so skin sensitivity is a whole different issue. So if you're allergic to lanolin, and it literally gives you a rash or hives or something from the lanolin, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that, like, there's been some discussion of merino wool. Well, merino wool, the fibers themselves are extremely fine. They're extremely fine, and they have all wool fibers have something called crimp. So if you think of like the 1980s, like crimping irons, I know I'm
your hair.
myself here, right? But it's a wavy thing. If you're too young for that, let's just suffice to say it's like waves,
like a zigzag,
right?
Yeah,
it's like a zigzag. Thank you. So anyhow, so all wool fibers have that crimp to them, and unfortunately, I don't have a sample sitting here. But the point is that merino is super crimpy, but it's really fine, and they're really, really, really small hairs. So even if those they're not like my sheep tend to be long wools, so they grow a longer staple every year.
Mhm.
So merino is shorter, but it's so fine that even though there's lots of little fuzzy bits sticking out, you don't feel them as easily because they're
Right.
so
They're
fine.
so small. Yeah.
Right. So other sheep breeds can have a thicker diameter hair.
Mm.
So you're going to feel it more easily where those ends of the fiber are poking out of the twisted yarn.
Right.
So that's what you're feeling, is that a lot of times, so a higher
So
quality
it's like a
wool.
texture thing more than the content of the fiber.
Right. Well, and I mean, it can be obviously very abrasive. So if you've ever had a wool hat that just made your forehead itch like crazy,
Yeah.
it's probably because the wool that was used was not necessarily high quality. Also,
Mhm.
so like I actually grow and sell yarn. So if you go to spoiledsheep.com, you can actually read the biographies of all my sheep I've had over the years.
Oh my
But
gosh, that's so cool. I wanna go
yeah,
learn about
spoiled
this
sheep. Just remember spoiled sheep. If you type that
spoiled
in, you can
sheep.
get
I
to
love that.
spoiledsheep.com. So any rate, so I was showing, for example, a long wool breed, which has a staple length of about 10 to 12 inches, one of my sheep. But in that case, it's so long that even though the fibers may not be merino fine, there's not going to be as many little
Uh,
fuzzies sticking
yeah.
out to be irritating. And there's also differences on how wool is processed. On the
Mhm.
whole, modern wool should not be as itchy because, frankly, we've put a lot of work into breeding better sheep.
Hmm.
So that doesn't mean
Interesting.
that you won't have an issue with it. But yes,
Right.
merino tends to be less itchy, but also just a lot of it has to do with quality. A cheap wool sweater is probably going to itch more than a more expensive one, just because,
Right.
frankly, you know, expensive sheep versus cheap sheep.
Well, and you know what was fascinating, speaking of with my travels on another trip when I went to Scotland and Ireland, and you see sheep farmers everywhere in Ireland. And so I really wanted to go to like a mill where they, made yarn or made thread or whatever they do with it. And I was asking it. I did finally find one. I found one in Scotland. I was looking in Ireland because that's where I saw a lot of sheep, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't really use we don't use the wool from our sheep." And I was like, what do you do with them?" And, like they're everywhere. And they said that they if they're going to use wool to make clothing, to make yarn, that they would get it from New Zealand actually. And I was like, really? So what do you do with the wool from the sheep that are everywhere that I'm seeing? And they said that it wasn't good quality because I guess it was so cold there. I don't
No,
know. That could have been incorrect.
no.
But they said that they use it for like insulation or like carpeting, like stuff that's not clothing.
Well, that's just it. Is remember that there's basically a sheep for every purpose. And so you don't want the same kind of wool for your carpet that you do for your next to skin layer.
Yeah, right. That makes
And
sense.
if it's like an Irish fisherman's sweater, you're not going to wear that next to your skin. You're not
Right.
intended to wear it next to your skin. So it doesn't have to be merino because
Yeah.
you're supposed to be wearing another layer in between, if nothing else, to protect your sweater from all the gunk coming off your skin.
Yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, so a lot of the sheep you'll see, unless it's been bred specifically for garment production,
Hmm.
a lot of sheep are bred, frankly, so that we can eat them. So, so you
Yeah.
don't worry about the quality of wool, but it does go into installation. Actually,
Hmm.
now a thing we're doing is pelleting. So it's actually being pelleted and used for mulch because they found it has
Interesting.
amazing properties in
Huh.
in terms of soil improvement. Yeah. So all of my waste wool. So I'm super excited because now I don't have any
Yeah.
waste wool. Everything that doesn't go into my yarn actually goes into pellets now. And so,
Wow.
but
Fascinating.
worldwide, the world wool market is in terrible shape right now, because basically the only word that consumers recognize is merino, and if it doesn't say merino on it, they won't buy it.
They think
And
it's not good.
so a lot of sheep breeders. So actually, in New Zealand, there are merino in New Zealand, but they're more so in Australia because it is true. So merinos prefer dry climates. So the merino
Mm.
sheep, in fact, once upon a time, the Spanish convinced themselves that the merinos couldn't possibly live outside Spain. So there's, like I said, I promise I won't get into more of that. But anyhow, so
I
the
love it.
climate
And they're loving it in the chat.
does matter. So in New Zealand, there's a lot of Romneys. Romneys are bred for wet climates. And I mean, I'll tell you, I can wear my Romneys, I can wear their yarn next to my skin, no problem. They really aren't itchy because they have a longer staple on them. And so they're really soft, but, and they're good quality sheep. But there's also a lot of Corriedales is actually a New Zealand breed that was developed in New Zealand using merinos, using Lincolns, using a variety of flocks. But that Corriedale is actually a breed that was developed. I'm pretty sure it was New Zealand. I'm pretty darn sure. But anyhow, like I have Corriedales, they have beautiful fleeces. So there's a lot of things, but just consumers don't know. They just assume if it's merino, they can't wear it. And that's really a shame because it's not true.
Yeah.
But again,
So we need more wool
education. Yeah.
I saw something about a wool tailor, an American wool tailor. There was another thing that I learned on that same trip to Ireland and Scotland when I finally found a factory that made thread and made fabric. I like the right words are escaping me, but it was a cashmere factory, and they got in, and I didn't know cashmere was camel hair.
No, it's not. No, cashmere comes from goats.
Goats. Maybe that's what it was. I swear it was camel because I was like, what? I thought it was.
No, there's camel hair. Yeah, you can buy camel. It's called camel hair. Yeah, it's made from camel. But and camel hair has great insulation qualities, but it's not the most durable fabric because it's prone to breakage, but they're hollow. So camel fiber is hollow, so it's really great insulation qualities. But cashmere comes from goats. They come from cashmere goats, and it has to be de-haired. So the cashmere that we wear is actually the downy undercoat. So they have to go through a process of actually combing out the long guard coats. Now, mohair is another goat fiber. Mohair comes, not to confuse you, but mohair comes from Angora goats, whereas Angora fiber comes from rabbits. Angora rabbits.
Right. Okay.
It gets really confusing.
Now, why would they use the same name?
But the mohair fiber, the mohair goats don't have to be de-haired, but they do have to be sheared like a sheep.
Okay. Interesting. It's just so fascinating. And I loved that place. It was so cool. And they wouldn't let me take any pictures. And I was so bummed. I actually ended up buying a really nice cashmere linen. It was it was like buttery. It was so pretty. And I did finally use it. I've used it on 2 garments that I used it for. So I want to go back and make sure. Rose Gold is saying, or Marcia says she loves the chemistry of it all. I mean, it really is cool. And then Lilybug said merino is used on babies here because it's so gentle. Rose Gold is saying, I'm loving this talk about natural fibers. When I learned about plastic polyester, I replaced all of my bed sheets, pillows, bed toppers, shower curtains, and bath rugs with natural fibers. Yeah. Good job. I'm snuggling under my soft merino wool blanket right now while I'm absorbing all of this knowledge. That's so great. Cheap sheep versus expensive sheep. Oh, don't hate on the cheap sheep. They have their purpose.
They for sure do. They have their purpose.
Sandra's asking, how durable is alpaca yarn?
Yeah, and there's a couple others too. There was one I can kind of like run in together. Well, Kathy was asking about what to wear in Arizona. Well, good luck with that.
Oh, yes,
Kathy.
I did see that one.
You know, as far as I'm in Arizona, linen is your friend. You know, linen is a great fiber for Arizona. They're called status
not
wrinkles.
A fun
Don't
fiber
worry about
for
those.
I will say that.
Yeah, they're called status wrinkles, but you still want like a really nice tropical weight wool jacket is great in the evenings because, you know, the temperature drops. So people don't understand that just because it's hot during the day doesn't mean the temperature doesn't drop at night, because that's what
unless you're in Las Vegas and it's the oven time of year and it's like living in an oven, and even at midnight it's 100 degrees and
yeah, because you have humidity. We don't have humidity, so it doesn't hold the heat. But someone else was asking about doing a formal gown in a hot, humid place, and again, that's where really, I mean, there's certain kinds of silk you could use, but, you know, honestly, there's some really beautiful linens out there. And if you really want to be, I mean, think about where linen's really popular, like Egypt, right? So, although Egypt, again, they wear wool as well.
Yeah.
But again, they call it tropical weight wool for a reason. But, honestly, like my friend Patricia Kay has had some Vogue patterns, like Vogue designer patterns for some of her beautiful linen outfit. And there's like a beautiful linen dress in there. Just depends on how formal you want it. But, that's something I would actually consider. I mean, there are silks that do breathe pretty well. But, when it comes to, if I'm going to hot and humidity land, I'm pretty much looking for all my linen is really my favorite. But sorry, what was the other one? Oh, about alpaca yarn. Alpaca, okay. Alpaca yarn, a lot of times they'll actually blend it with a little bit of wool because it helps it to stick to itself a little better. So when you spin it, so alpaca, so wool, if you look at wool under a microscope, it's got overlapping scales. And when it gets moist and it gets warm, like if you want a felt wool, those scales kind of open up and then they interlock. Alpaca doesn't have those. So alpaca doesn't wet felt very well. It can felt, it definitely can felt, but not as well as wool does. So the alpaca yarn is, it's not so much a strength issue, so much as it doesn't lock together quite as much. So you can have a little bit more growth in it, if that makes sense to a knitter. But actually, I mean, I've knitted with alpaca yarns before and really not noticed any huge difference between that and a decent quality wool. I mean, it's super soft. I love alpaca, but like I said, a lot of times they may blend it with just a tiny bit of wool just to help give it better structure and to help those fibers kind of interlock and give it a little bit more structural integrity so that the fibers don't kind of slip in it as much. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Tori Lynn says that she's in Pahrump, Nevada, and it's out all night long with our 3%.
It's Nevada. You can't. I mean, there's only so much. I mean, here in Spokane,
that place was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. I mean, I'm sorry you're in Nevada. That's. I mean, it's
got its perk, like we said. With the cheap.
There's good and bad to everything. Well, and I've been to northern Nevada in March when there was still snow on the ground. So
yeah,
I mean,
well, Reno, there's really only Pahrump. I know where Pahrump is, which it's really kind of close to. There's not much in Pahrump. It's kind of close to Vegas. So it's really, I've driven from Vegas to Reno, and there is not much in between. I will tell you, but very different climate structure. Like Reno was a trip to me because I lived in Las Vegas. For those of you who don't know, I lived in Las Vegas for 11 years, and I didn't think that was going to happen. But working in entertainment, it was really hard to leave because constant work. It's actually where I started my business, and learned all about synthetic fibers and acrobats. But, when I started doing shows, even after I left Las Vegas, I started doing touring shows and doing shows in Reno. We would tech them in Reno. And that was such a trip to me because it's all the casinos and all the things like Vegas. And then you go outside and see the mountains. And I'm like, wait a minute, I feel like I'm in a weird Vegas alternate reality here. So it was a trip, but really it's just those two. There isn't much. I mean, Pahrump is near, like, state line near Vegas. Kind of, Pahrump if you go from Vegas to Southern California where I grew up. But yeah, there's a time in Las Vegas that I just called it the oven time of year because it just felt like you were in an oven. Like you opened the oven and you're just like, I'm just going to hang out in here. And if the wind blew, it felt like a hairdryer. There was like it was hot as heck at night, in the middle of the night. You couldn't go in the shade and cool off because there was no humidity and the dryness. This is totally off topic, but I have to share this because every time I think about how dry it is in Las Vegas, like nosebleeds are a thing, like your boogers are stabbing you, like talking about moisture. But the most shocking thing that happened to me is we were working on a unitard costume. So it had Lycra and mesh. And one of my workers was working in the back room. Like we had this little separate area. And all I heard a loud like pop. And then Trish, the machine stopped working. It shorted. All he did was he took the costume he was working on, he pulled it off one machine and went to another machine. And that drag caused an arc that shorted out my machine, and it burned a hole in the mesh of the costume. Like, what? What kind of crazy static electricity do you have to have in the air? Like I was floored. It was crazy. I didn't even know that was possible. So yeah, dryness and heat, Las Vegas, most of the time.
Yeah, I've never burned fabric, but here in Spokane, it can get hot, dry enough that I've rebooted my machine by touching it. I mean, most of my machines have good enough static. They've got a strap inside them. They've got a grounding strap inside, but it's happened. But I make you can use fabric softener and is it rubbing alcohol? Anyway, you can make your own homemade anti-static spray. If you just Google a recipe for it, it helps a lot. So I actually will use the anti-static spray on my cutting table and my ironing board.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
See, now I live in the land of humidity.
Yeah, so it's not an issue for you anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. I didn't even know a dehumidifier was a thing until I moved to North Carolina. I was like, what? You pull humidity out of the air? Like I had never, that was mind blowing to me. We have a couple, so Lily Bugs, you are like in the spinning world down there. It sounds like in New Zealand that your mom used to have Angora goats and spin fibers. That's so cool. Rose Gold says, I only sew garments with flax, linen, cotton, rib knit, and some wool using cotton thread, no polyester thread. My polyester thread is only for mock-ups. I will say this, since I live in the world of synthetic fibers with acrobats and stretch, and you have to have those things for performance and they last longer, all those things. You want to sew stretch with polyester thread. Absolutely. Because polyester will have that give naturally. And then there's
primarily with polyester thread, even with what I sew. I actually despise cotton thread because it makes a mess out of my machine. But I love, I actually do sew with silk thread. So I'll use silk thread on my wools and silks because it behaves more similarly. But you have to be aware that it's UV sensitive. And the other thing about cotton thread is that if you're in a really dry climate like I am, it can kind of dry rot. So the lack of humidity, cotton is actually stronger when it's wet. So that's another thing. Cottons and linens, they're actually stronger when they're wet.
Interesting.
So if they're really dry all the time, the thread tends to break real easy. So that's why for some of you, it may work great. So I don't mean to diss on cotton thread. And I know that quilters,
I never even thought about, I mean, it makes perfect sense now that we're talking about it, but I never even thought about like where you are might be.
It matters. It really matters. And like even, I mean, like silk is UV sensitive. So you have to be really kind of careful. Like silk thread, you've got to make sure silk thread is kept away from the light at all times, because otherwise that outer layer of your spool will be rotten. Basically, I had a friend who hand sewed a beautiful petticoat for herself, and she didn't even think about that. And then when she washed it, it fell apart.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh man.
It was rotten.
Yeah, that's such good things. That's so good to know. Polly O'Loughlin says, yeah, it's hard to find a gas station between Las Vegas and Reno. Amen, girl. Or a radio station. That was a long, quiet drive. I was like, yeah, let's drive and see what happens. Never again. I was like, I will always fly. 116 at 10 at night in Las Vegas. Yeah, don't miss that at all, Tori Lynn. I'm so sorry. I am very happy to, because even in the summer when it gets hot and humid here, and humidity is rough here sometimes, at least there's that breeze, and it cools that. You're like, oh, you feel it right away. There's no relief in Vegas. And trying to go camping in Las Vegas was its own fun adventure, trying to find shade and things like that. Anyway, yeah. And so there's some talk about that. Liz from Let's Get Sewing says cotton thread can sometimes be revitalized by putting it in a Ziploc in the freezer. Interesting. Huh. This is so cool. I love this little chat. Well, we could probably go on for ages and ages, but we are already at the hour. I can't even believe it. That flew by so fast. Thank you so much, Katrina. I wanted you guys, for those of you who didn't really know Katrina, to learn more about how amazing. I mean, obviously, we learned so much in this last hour about textiles. And so you got to see how amazing she is and why I was like, Katrina's got to be the girl to teach the textiles class, because I am not going to be that knowledgeable at all. So you can find Katrina lots of, I'm going to tag your, is it spoiledsheep.com so people can go
and
learn
otherwise
about
just
your sheep.
katrinawalker.com and they can,
Or KatrinaWalker.com. Okay, I'll put that in the description after we wrap up so that you can go and check out more about Katrina and find out more about her. If you want to join her textiles class, Katrina is going to be teaching a textiles class on what kind of textiles to choose for specific garments. As you can tell, she's well versed in her textiles. So we're very excited to welcome her in. This will be in my private pattern making community. And so if you would like access to that, we only open the doors 2 times out of the year. So this is one like very awesome part to the pattern place, but there's so much more to it. And you can find out more about that down in the link below, but hurry because the class is this Thursday. So we are kind of doing this little teaser to tell you about it and hope that you will join us there and maybe even stay longer than the first month, that you love our community. And if you want to learn about fitting, pattern making, sewing, you know, my background in costuming, you know, we add master classes every month. In fact, next month we have Claire Louise Hardy, who wrote the book Clone Your Clothes that just came out. So she's going to be teaching that class live. I'm super excited about that. So you do get classes from me and my knowledge, but I like to invite all my friends because if you want to know something in the community and I don't know about it, I'm going to find somebody who does. And it's a great way for me to learn cool stuff too. So you can find out more about that in the description, but hurry because the doors close this Friday, September 27th at 11:59. So I hope you will join us there. And if you have any questions on any of that, please contact me. And I will put Katrina's website on there as well. Thank you guys so much. Sandra says she's looking forward to Thursday's session. She's one of our Sew Stars. And I really appreciate all of you for joining us live. That was a lot of fun to like get the feedback from different parts and different worlds and hear your questions. And yeah, this will be saved. So if you're watching the replay, you know, I hope you enjoy as well. Thank you so much, Katrina. And we will see you in our pattern place on Thursday. Super excited about it. And then we'll both be in Houston for Quilt Fest at the end of next month. So maybe we'll get to meet some of you there too. All right, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.